All right, what's going on, everyone? So, in today's video, I'm going to be covering mindset for junior golf. This is going to be as close as I can do to a complete guide in a single YouTube video. So, if you enjoy videos like this and you want to learn more about junior golf and helping your junior golfer develop to play college golf, go ahead and subscribe to the channel below. And if you enjoyed this video as well, please leave a like. It does help push it out to more people. It's a newer channel, so every like helps a ton. So let's go ahead and just dive into this because this is like one of the most common things that I get asked as a coach about mindset specifically. A lot of parents really struggle with this. A lot of junior golfers really struggle with this, and I think it's also a little bit of a catch-all. So a lot of the times, I'll talk to parents where they'll have their kid either just being a beginner or being intermediate or being advanced. And they might say something along the lines of, hey, we really need to work on their mindset or we need help with their mindset. And it kind of falls into a lot of different categories. Sometimes it's, poor decisions on the golf course. Sometimes it's emotional immaturity. Sometimes it's physical anxiety. There's all sorts of different things. And I think it's really important that we define what exactly is mindset. And so this is just my personal definition when I think about this particular problem. And that is the ability to consistently execute at our skill level. So that might sound a little bit odd, but what do I mean by that? Well, when we have performance issues on the golf course, we need to be able to measure that against something. It can't just be based off of whatever I think I should be able to do, because that leaves a lot of room for just kind of unreasonable expectations, right? If you have a junior golfer and, let's say they shoot relatively, average scores, let's say they shoot, 80, 78, 84, maybe they play good, shoot 75. Well, if they had the expectation of themselves that they should shoot 65 and they were convinced that they had the skill to shoot 65, well, if they didn't shoot 65, then they would immediately attribute that to mindset, which is kind of like where I was saying that it can be a little bit of a catch-all, and it can also be a little bit of an excuse to let you believe that you're better than you really are. And so that's just why it's so important to understand that the mindset's really just being able to perform at the skill level you're actually at. And so when we think about that player, maybe they have a scoring average of 80. Well, mindset's going to be, okay, well, when I shoot 83, I don't get super mad and upset about it because I understand it's pretty normal. Like, that's not going to be that crazy of a score. That's just kind of what I should expect out of myself. And at the same time, let's say if I do quick math in my head, if I'm 7 over or 9 over through 9 holes, and in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, what if I keep doing this? I'm gonna shoot 90 or 95 or whatever. Mindset's really the ability to kind of put that all out of mind and say, okay, well, I just got to keep doing the main things, and maybe got unlucky a few times on the front side. And if I just play my game again, the probability that I shoot something a little bit better, maybe I shoot 4 over, it kind of flips the other way. And yeah, maybe I shot worse than I would have normally, but I also didn't, completely have a meltdown, right? I just had some bad luck for a short period of time. So it's kind of the first principle here. Now, my goal for this video, this lesson, is to really quantify what mindset is, how to measure it, and how to train for that. And so I'll kind of get into each one of those subjects throughout this. But that's really what we want to be able to do. It's like, what is this thing? Like, let's actually be able to put our hands on it and then say, okay, cool. Am I doing this better or worse? Right? Because we can't just say, oh, well, emotionally, I feel better on the golf course. Okay, I mean, I guess that's cool. But there's not a lot that we can sink our teeth into with that. Versus if we can say objectively, we're performing closer to our skill level more consistently, well, that's really, really good. We can actually say, okay, I've improved a lot. So we need to be able to measure that. We also need to be able to say, how do we improve in general? We all, at the end of the day, are doing this stuff to try and shoot lower scores and trying to shoot lower scores more frequently. So it's, how do we do that? And how do we do that in an effective way? So what really is going to contribute to our ability to execute? Or, as you might say, what contributes to our mindset? Well, there's about 40% of it that's accounted for by things that happen during an event, during a performance, during a tournament, right? So this is stuff like I hit a ball out of bounds and I'm freaked out by that. Or I'm just kind of like freaked out in my particular moment. Maybe I'm leading the tournament. Maybe I'm dead last, like whatever the case may be. that accounts for about 40% of our ability to execute in the moment. And there's a bunch of amazing neuroscience on this. I'm not going to get into that stuff. I'm not an expert at those things. If you wanted to go deeper into that, I would recommend looking up Dr. Izzy Justice. She's done a lot of amazing research on this stuff, but just for our purposes, just know that 40% of our ability to execute, a more technical way to look at this might be retrieve information in our brain, which I know every one of you has experienced. If you're a junior golfer watching this, you've probably had this moment. And for parents, I'm sure you've had this moment with your child as well, where your child is not able to do something, or they're not able to tell you something or retrieve information about something that you know that they know how to do. And that's exactly what this is. Kind of the simplest way to put it is they have kind of a mental traffic jam. They've got so many things going on in their head that the information can't travel from where it is, like where it's stored, to where it needs to go that they can express it. So that's kind of the simplest form of what's happening there. But that's all affected. About 40% of that is what happens in that moment. So you hit a ball out of bounds, you're panicked. It's hard to hit the next shot well because your brain's so freaked out. You miss a 2-foot putt, same thing. Now, this is the other side of the coin, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on a lot in this video, which is the other 60%. And a lot of the time people get focused on what's a quick trick to make me not anxious in the moment. And that's definitely great. And Izzy has stuff on that. But I believe in hitting the main thing first, right? Whatever's going to have the biggest impact, let's do that. And in this case, the thing that's going to have the biggest impact is actually kind of the simplest, and it has the most cascading positive effects here. So when we talk about general beliefs, so what do I expect out of myself, right? And having that kind of match up with reality, and the events leading up to the performance, right? So let's say you're going into a tournament, and just to take Scotty Scheffler as an example, you get arrested and you don't have any time to warm up and you have to go out and play. Now, that would be an event leading up to the event. That's something that would stress you out, right? So that would be one example of that. But there's any number of examples of things leading up to an event. And then general beliefs would be, things like, hey, I think I should shoot, say, 72 when my scoring average is 80, right? Or I have a more realistic expectation of here's what I should shoot. So when I go out there and shoot a particular number, I'm kind of like, yeah, that's kind of what I expected. That's about my game. How kind of freaked out we are is kind of a baseline. And then those other events kind of pile onto it. The things that happen in the event, hitting a ball out of bounds, pile on to kind of wherever our baseline already was. So common mistakes. This is the most common one that, and I've kind of already alluded to this a few times, is the expectation that the performance should be at a higher level than it currently is. And the other side of this, another one that's really common, is kind of a disregard for preparation and the events leading up to performance. So that could be, you've got an event coming up, but you didn't have to do a practice round. Oh, I'm nervous. Be like, yeah, no crap. Like, of course you're nervous. You should be nervous because you didn't prepare, right? It's like if I'm going into a math test and I didn't study at all and I don't know any of the concepts, then it's like, but I kind of have some idea of stuff I can do with numbers. Yeah, it makes sense to be nervous. It's not reasonable for me to say, well, here's some breathing techniques for you to do better. It's like, no, you're screwed. But that's because you didn't practice. So the solution isn't figure out some breathing techniques. The thing to figure out is how to prepare better, or decide that you're going to prepare better and not use that as a Band-Aid. And that's kind of like, kind of hits on this last point here, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but you don't want to be looking for a Band-Aid. You don't want to be looking for a quick fix or a mental trick, or like, oh, well, if I breathe in this way, it calms me out. It's like, yes, sure. Like, there are things like that. I'm not going to go into those things in this video because, to be quite honest, I don't think that that's where you should start. I think you should have these kind of baseline sorted out first, and then you can add on those other things, and those things become very powerful. But we want to make sure that we're starting with the highest leverage stuff first. So examples of expecting higher than normal performance. One really simple one is, let's say you hit a shot in the trees, right? and you've got to hit this kind of 30-yard slice around the trees, a 6-iron hitting it out of the rough, and you hit a tree, and then you make triple, and because you thought you could make par if you hit this crazy shot. And then you get upset about that because you're like, oh, well, sometimes I can hit that shot, or I feel like I can hit that shot, a decent amount of the time. So I'm mad at myself for not pulling it off. And it's like, okay, cool. But the right decision there is to pitch out, because that's not a reasonable shot to be able to hit. And that's really not a reasonable shot for hardly anybody to be able to hit. Right. So if we were upset about that, it would be very unreasonable. Now, if we say, hey, I'm going to take that gamble, I want to win this tournament, and I'm in a position where I don't care about what my overall scoring average is going to be, I just I want to take that gamble. Okay, fine. But it's not reasonable for us to be upset about that afterwards, because we actually just made a bad decision. Another example would be, if you have a scoring average of 79, which is not that crazy, you go out there and shoot 83 in let's say an AJGA qualifier. I feel like I can go do really well, and you shoot 74 to qualify, shoot 83. Oh, I played so bad. And it's like, now you pretty much shot what you would have been reasonable for you to expect that you shot, because you're going to have a little bit of variance on your average. I'm going to talk about that more, but it's not reasonable to have a scoring average 79 and really think you should go out there and shoot 74. Another example, kind of going over to kind of disregarding events lining up. This is kind of how it gets proposed to me often is, I played in a tournament, didn't do that well. I was really anxious. It's like, well, did you do a practice round? No, I didn't do a practice round. Okay, boom, right there. That's that. When's the last time you played 36 holes back to back? Pretty much most junior golf tournaments are going to be 36 holes or more if you're playing at a high level. No, I don't do that at all. I just always practice. So is it unreasonable that you're anxious going into an event that is going to strain you in a way you're not used to being strained, or make you focus for a longer period of time than you're used to focusing? That's obviously you're going to be anxious. What did your preparation look like? Well, I didn't play golf. Oh, we just got off vacation. You're like, okay, then that's not a mindset problem. That's just a bad decision putting a tournament right after you have a vacation, you don't have any warm up, and then expecting yourself to be really comfortable. And it's like, okay, I understand, things happen. Sometimes you go on vacation, you come back playing the tournament, but it's like, okay, let's just let's go into this being reasonable. We just got off of vacation. Are we going to do any prep work? Because that would be the first thing is like, okay, well, can we go hit some balls? All right, which direction is the ball curving? Do I have some confidence in that? Can I go play a round of golf? Does, things feel relatively normal for me? It doesn't matter what I shoot. It's like, do all my skills kind of feel about where they should be? Okay, cool. I'm going to go into a tournament. I haven't really had a lot of prep. I don't really know where my game's at. How nervous am I going to be? Well, I wasn't that nervous at all. It was just this one skill to break down. Okay, that makes sense. But if you go into it and you're like, oh, I was nervous or I didn't play well, it's like, yeah, no crap. Of course you didn't play well because you didn't prepare. Other stuff, they're super common. No set weekly schedule. I work really hard when I've got a tournament coming up, and the other weeks I completely ignore golf. I don't take things seriously. That's just not smart. Don't play rounds of golf for a score routinely. So I see this a lot of the time with junior golfers where, they go out and they play 6 holes and then they, quit if they're not playing good. That kind of stuff. It's just not going to prepare you to play long rounds of golf, right? Because you're not practicing that skill. Not playing practice rounds. Again, it's like you're playing a tournament. You're making all this effort to go and play in this tournament, but you're not going to know what the golf course, how the golf course is going to play before you play it. It's just kind of dumb. And then taking long periods of time off and then jumping straight into competition. Another one that's just don't expect to do well. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. So here's really how you should be thinking about scoring, which is one of these kind of foundational baseline principles here. We want to be thinking about our scores in terms of a normal distribution, right? So what I mean by normal distribution, and you guys are in math, this is what that looks like. It's a normal distribution curve. And so what that means is the most scores are going to be in kind of this middle portion with the 68% here. That's all that means is 68% of your numbers are going to be in that middle portion. And then about 95% are going to be within, kind of this larger portion. And then pretty much all the numbers are going to be at the bottom here, the longest portion, right? And so that's kind of the way to think about your game. You're going to have these different numbers and they're just going to come out kind of based on different variables in your game. Now, what are those variables? Well, we've got your average, right? So that's kind of like that middle point. That's your average. And then we have your standard deviation, which is kind of how consistent are you at shooting your scoring average, right? So how often are you like right around that number, and how often are you like way off? That's going to give you your standard deviation. And then the number of numbers. So how many rounds are you going to play? If you play one, well, there's going to be a lot of variance in like how one round turns out. Whereas if you play 10, it's going to be a lot more kind of consistent. You're going to have kind of a pattern to that. Another thing to ask, just going into any particular event, is, are there any variables or other things that might cause me to get different than normal results, or make the results that I've been getting not representative of where my game would be at or what I should expect of myself? So for example, if you play golf courses that are 6,400 yards, and that's where your numbers are coming from, that's how you've gotten your scoring average and your standard deviation, and then you go play a golf course at 7,000 yards, well, you've kind of thrown something in there that's very different. And so it is unreasonable to hold that average that you're looking at and say, well, I should play to that, even though I'm playing this much longer golf course and I'm probably hitting different shots into each hole and so on and so forth. That's not reasonable. Another one would be if you always play in calm conditions and it's super windy, of course you're going to score worse. So those are all things to just be aware of. We're never going to have this as a perfect science. But this is to kind of understand and be like, okay, well, if my scoring average is 79 and then it's 20 miles an hour wind and I'm used to playing in no conditions, well, it's like that might move your scoring average to, 82, 83, just because it's that much more difficult and you're not used to it. So those are other things to kind of think about. So how do we make this as simple as possible? Your scoring average should translate for you, for your junior golfer, is how skilled are you? How good are you? Your scoring average is really going to show that. Your standard deviation is an understanding of how good is your mindset? How consistent are you at performing at that level, right? Like how consistently can you do your average, right? That's all that is. And so this is just kind of a visual of, this blue here is not a lot of variance, right? So a really, really solid mindset. Everything's kind of right around the same. Tiger in 2000 would be a great example of this. If you guys ever wanted to dig through some numbers, Tiger was excellent all the time. And so his average was really, really good, and his standard deviation was really, really small. So he shot really good, and he was really close to it all the time. A player who is more variable in their mindset, they're going to have a wider standard deviation, right? So that's how things are going to kind of change there. So this is, and I'm going to show you guys this a little bit more, but this is a random number generator within kind of a standard deviation, right? So here's kind of like the numbers you should expect of yourself. And we're just going to spit out numbers based on how many events we're going to do here. So if you're going to play 10 rounds of golf and you've got a scoring average of, whatever, in this case, 79.5, you got a standard deviation of 4, and you want 2 rounds of golf, just 2 random rounds of golf, you generate, boom, those are the 2 numbers, right? And you can hit generate and generate and generate. You're going to get different numbers every single time, but it's going to be within that range. And so this is kind of the way that you want to think about your game overall. It's like, what are these variables? It's going to spit something out. Now, if we want to dig into this a little bit deeper, we've got kind of highlighted this arrow here. The mean, it's just a fancy word for average. Now, that mean correlates with your gross scoring average. I've got a clip from Junior Golf Scoreboard with a player. And so again, if we know that variable, all right, then we can kind of understand that within and use this calculator to really help us understand what we should be shooting. If we were tracking our stats on a regular basis, we can also see that. So if you follow any of my other content, you watch any of my other videos, I'm always going to be talking about stat tracking because it really helps us understand what's going on, where are our actual scores at. And if we don't know, that's a problem. If we just have it on our ranking, you probably can't even see that on your ranking. That's part of a coach's thing. You need to be able to have somewhere to say, okay, this is what my average is, so that I can predict what I'm going to shoot within reason. Now, within that, we want to be able to also look at like what makes that up. So, this player scores. We kind of have these key variables here. These key statistics we want to look at, and that's going to kind of predict what we should shoot. And you guys can probably see that, those are all pretty close, right? And so then we can also say from there, well, where do we want to prioritize our attention? Okay, well, in this case for this player, if we improve greens regulation, that's going to have the biggest impact on his overall scores. And so again, it's not enough to just say, oh, well, my average is this. It's like, okay, cool. What do I do with that? When I'm on the golf course, where's my focus going? Okay, it's really prioritizing greens regulation, right? It's really prioritizing that I'm not being overly aggressive. I'm just making sure that I'm hitting as many greens as possible. So I'm going to have as many opportunities to score as possible. And I'm also going to be able to cut out as many bogeys as possible. And so again, if we improve, in that particular category, it's about 0.89 shots. So what are you going to shoot? Like, this is kind of the question that really all this boils down to, because if you knew what you were going to shoot before you shot it, then there's no real mindset that goes into that. It's just kind of like, okay, I know what I'm going to shoot. I shot it. Okay, cool. I feel all right about that. I don't feel particularly anxious. And I know that the biggest issue here is a skill deficiency, right? Versus if I shoot a number that I didn't expect, well, then that kind of freaks me out. And that reaction is kind of, that mindset there is I am not performing to the level that I think that I should. And that can be for different reasons. That can be because I didn't know that my scoring average is whatever it was, or it could be because I'm not prepared very well. So what are you going to shoot? If you don't have those numbers, start tracking your stats, something like Draw More Circles, which is what you see those clips from me. That's my favorite stats tool. It has all the numbers that I like to look for. So if you guys aren't already tracking stats, use that. If you're not happy with whatever tool you guys are already using for tracking stats and just feels like you've got a lot of information, I really recommend them. Now, if you had the answer to those two numbers, so whatever average is and whatever standard deviation is, then you can run this experiment. If you don't have those numbers, or at least you're close, you can still try this out. So I'm going to hop on over to this page here. And just so you guys know, this, let's see here, it's just goodcalculators.com/normal distribution generator. But this is a tool where we can actually see, like, okay, let's plug in this player's scoring average. I've gone ahead and calculated his standard deviation. You can just look up standard deviation calculator, put in your last 10 scores, and it'll just tell you what those are. Or you can guess. Average for junior golfers about 4. And then you can put in the number of values. So how many rounds of golf are you going to play? And you can kind of use this to do two different things. The first one I'm going to do with you is a little bit of an exercise. And this can be kind of fun for you to really kind of train yourself to understand what you should expect of yourself based on where your game is at. And that's, again, a lot of mindset is just getting what you expect in line with what actually happens. So let's say we've got this profile, we're going into an event, we're playing a tournament. What are we going to shoot? Generate 70, 80. Now that's just random. There's no mindset in this. Like, there's no mindset in this whatsoever. So how can we read this, right? We go into this tournament, we're like, all right, cool. I'm just going to go out there and play my game. Shot 70. Amazing. How many of you would now, seeing that result, be like, oh crap, what happened on day 2? I shot 80. I did so bad. I made all these mistakes, whatever, right? Bear in mind, this is an excellent standard deviation. This is like Tiger Woods, 2000 level standard deviation. This is really, really good. 80. And that has nothing to do with any mindset whatsoever. That is pure randomness. And so that is why this is so important for you guys to understand. It's like, it's not, you can't just look back on every bad round and say, oh, that was mindset. You can only do that when you play enough rounds of golf. In the same sense, let's say you had 5 tournaments you're going to play in. Each one of those tournaments had 2 rounds of golf. You could go ahead and here, plug in 10, hit generate, and this is just going to give you what you would expect, right? So let's say tournament number 1, you shoot 70, 73. Amazing. Open the season really, really good. For whatever tournament you had lined up, maybe it was an HAGA, maybe it was some random event. You don't know, right? 73, 76. Okay, not too bad. 73, 76 again. Again, we're pretty consistent there. 77, 76, not our best tournament. 77, 77. Kind of feels like we're moving in a negative direction. But remember here, like, these are the exact same numbers again. So there's no mindset in here. There's no real deficiency in the game. Like that's just randomness. And I can't stress this enough of how important this is to understand when you're going into these events, to not always be looking back and judging, oh, well, my game really broke down. It's like, no, it didn't. Almost certainly it was randomness. And so again, let's do this again. All right, boom, 76, 76, 75, 72. Right. So now I was like, oh, it seems like our game's coming back around. 73, 72. 74, 78, 76, 75. And so like that's what you should expect based on these numbers. And you can kind of see how, if you just took a random set of numbers, like it might be upsetting for you to be like, oh, I don't like that. But that's a lesson for you to understand, oh, I don't have a clear understanding what to expect out of myself in my game. That's what I need to work on, in understanding what to expect better, rather than finding some hack or some fancy way to make me feel better about bad scores. Because you're always going to have that cognitive dissonance when you look at a bad round and try and tell yourself it was okay. You have to actually understand that whatever round you shot that you thought was bad actually isn't. And that the core problem is that you just need to get better and you need to get more skilled, right? And so then the question becomes, okay, where do I need to put my focus in order to do that? So if we see an overall positive trend in this, it might be because our mean, or our average, means just a fancy word for average, is improving. And if we are able to see that over a long period of time, we're going to see better and better scores. But that doesn't mean we're still not going to have some scores that feel like they're not very good. And so that's why it's so important to not create these narratives for yourself about like, oh, everything's mindset. It's probably not. Most of it is probably just because you don't have the skill that you think that you do. And so that's why it's so important to be tracking your stats and be really clear about all this stuff. And so just go ahead and kind of the next step is like, what number one, track your stats religiously. Like if you're not already doing this, I can't really take you seriously when you say, oh, I have a bad mindset, because what evidence do you have for that? You just have anecdotal, I shot 70 the first day and shot 80 the second day, and that's happened 2 or 3 times, so I think I have a mindset issue. It's like, or it's just randomness. So again, if you're not already tracking your stats, you want to play college golf, go do that. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not serious about making this happen. So that's just first thing. Improve the skills that cause your scoring average to improve. So you kind of saw me touch on that, what I do with students, where looking at their kind of core numbers and saying, okay, here's what we need to prioritize for this period of time that's going to yield us the most shots. That's the main thing you need to do with those stats, is prioritize the skills that are going to cause you to improve. Not just say, I want to shoot better scores, but what specifically do I need to do in my game objectively based on my numbers that's going to cause me to score better? Then you need to be able to focus on performing to your level and not above your level, right? So you've got your game, right? Like if you played 10 rounds, you've got a pretty clear idea of what that all looks like for you. And then it's like, all right, cool. How do I keep as much of that pretty much the same? And then how do I improve just one of those areas by a little bit? And if you can do that for a long period of time, that's how you improve. When you go into a tournament, again, I know where I'm at. How do I just do my best to kind of stay there? And I can't make that judgment after 1 or 2 or 3 rounds of golf. I need to see a decent amount of golf. And so when we've got a tournament season coming up, you don't want to look at it as like, oh, one tournament, this one's really important. You know, look at me like, okay, I'm playing in 10 events. I'm playing 20 total rounds of golf. I should probably have a decent idea of what I'm shooting in tournaments after about 5 rounds. And then I can strategically say, okay, I need to adjust these things. I want to improve in these ways. And then over the next 5 or next 10 rounds, I can say, okay, am I actually improving in that way? If I am, amazing, keep doing it. If I'm not, make an adjustment, right? And it's counterintuitive, it's very methodical, and it feels very slow. And I think that's why a lot of players just want the easy out and be like, I just want a tip. But the reality is, like, this stuff takes months, quarters, years to really see meaningful progress. And we always kind of want that quick flash in the pan of that, we have a scoring average of 75, we go out there and shoot 70, we feel amazing about ourselves, but really it was just randomness. And that's just super important to be aware of. Now, if you want help with the granular details, specifically, Where do I need to focus? How do I translate all these stats? Because you're going to get a bunch of stats, and even something like circles, which I like a lot. How do I translate all these stats into specific practice? And then also, like, what do I do when I do have that problem in tournaments or that specific case, or anxious or whatever? If you want help with that, then there's going to be a link below this video where you can learn a little bit about my approach to college development and all of that. And if that's something you're interested in, you can book a call with me and we can kind of talk about what's going on for you, and I'll see if I can help. But that's where I'm going to leave you guys. So whether or not we work together or anything like that, track your stats. If you guys are serious about this, you need to be tracking your stats. Use those stats to figure out the skills that are lacking. Focus on those. And specifically, the skills are going to help you score better. So you might have noticed in that slide that I showed for that player, scrambling is not very good. Don't care. Doesn't matter. We're already hitting a ton of greens. Doing way, way better in our scrambling doesn't do a lot for us. If we just simply hit more greens, that's going to be worth the most to them. So that's the next piece of this. And then when you're in the events, don't worry about overperforming. See where you're at. Focus on that. Focus on improving that average as much as possible. Let the scores fall where they will. Don't worry about anything else. So hopefully this video is helpful for you guys to kind of go in, look at those numbers, and kind of see this from a little bit of a higher view. If it was, please leave a like. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next week.